We've spoken a lot this morning, or rather in and out of all of our conversations, we have talked about our locals movement, which sort of began here actually at a past conference. We now have many branches across the country. We're going to hear about those a little bit later. But to begin with, this is terribly important. We have 4 of our prominent locals, I would call them organisers if they don't mind, are going to just talk to us briefly, each one, about their particular passions and views. I want to start, if I may, with our organiser from Norwich, Chris Davis. So please give him a good welcome. Thank you.
How do you follow David Starkey? Konstantin Kissin, who coincidentally spoke from this very lectern 2 years ago, was asked in an interview what he thought was the remedy for wayward direction of modern society. Travel was his answer. Seeing for yourself the precious freedoms we enjoy and take for granted in the West compared to other restrictive societies. I took this action big time in my youth, backpacking around the globe for 5 unbroken years in the 1980s. No rich parents, I was brought up on a Brixton Council flat estate, served an apprenticeship, then worked to save and travel. All my worldly possessions carried on my back. This in an era before social media and GPS, so remote meant remote. It is what I encountered in Africa, framed against the situation we face today in Britain, that I wish to comment on. I was enthusiastic and did my best to absorb the new cultures I ventured through. I didn't always claim to understand or agree with their values, but showed respect as a visitor in their country. After all, when in Rome, when finding someone who spoke English, I would get out pen and pad and learn key words. Mixed with clumsily gesticulating, I would engage with appreciative local people and enjoy a sense of achievement, even grasping basic Arabic. Comparatively, I don't understand or appreciate how some people would not just visit, but move to Britain without inclination to learn our language, engage in our culture, and even wishing for their own laws. Where is their joyful adventure, enthusiasm, or even respect for a wonderful host nation? Travelling through ex-French and Belgian countries, 15 to 20 years after their independence, I could palpably feel the resentment for their former colonial masters. Approaching former British, I braced myself for a harsh reception. But to my surprise, often encountered warmth, even spying a portrait of a young queen hung in simple dwellings. In an African town square, I noticed an older man watching me while nervously looking around. Having checked the coast was clear, he timidly approached and in hushed voice asked, "When are you British coming back?" I was totally flummoxed by this question and didn't know what to say. "No stability," he kept echoing. This encounter would be repeated. No way am I suggesting that we should return. Their self-determination is a bumpy road that we also experienced after the Romans left. But I believe our British rule had a different feel to other colonial masters and, of course, was first to abolish slavery. Like the refugees who claim asylum on our shores, I too have escaped conflict. I was in shell-potted Kampala during the Ugandan Bush Civil War, with nightly gun and mortar fire outside my room. I feared unruly soldiers would burst in at any moment. I eventually made an escape to neighbouring Tanzania, encountering a military roadblock en route where ill-disciplined soldiers molested and rifle-whipped. Finally crossing the border, I let out a great sigh of relief. Those landing today on safe Mediterranean shores but holding back their great sigh of relief till after hopping over other safe countries to reach England's shores are not escaping refugees. Women tell me that people risking their lives in flimsy boats proves that they are all indeed refugees. I wish to alter this perception. You don't understand because you're not a woman. Men are regularly told about issues involving women. I'm turning this on its head. You don't understand because you're not a man. It's commonly instinctive for young men to take risks. They feel invincible. They're hardwired to accept danger, as generations of young men have proven marching off to war. Many of these so-called English Channel refugees are simply taking an accepted hazard for a better standard of life. Of course, as a civilized nation, we must accept true refugees, but we have the great British tradition of queuing, a process which they choose not to do. When in a lawless country, cornered by a corrupt official, often looking to extort, I imagined having a Star Trek communicator to say, "Beam me up, Scotty," transporting me back to a safe and lawful free speech Blighty. However, in today's Britain, I find myself wondering where I would ask Scotty to beam me to now. Probably to the sanity of the New Culture Forum and one of its growing locals groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, very much. It was actually a conversation with Chris 2 or 3 years ago which kind of kick-started the whole idea of locals. I'd now like to invite up Sheila Bryans, who is one of the organisers from our London branch. Thank you.
March 2024. An intruder breaks into the property of an elderly Jewish neighbours, leaving a note on the kitchen table demanding money, the amount I don't know. It states, "If you do not pay up, I will kill you." The London of my childhood was a very different place, my experience. From my Hertfordshire village, London trips were fun. Shopping, independent fashion emporiums, Bieber, Chelsea Girl, Way in Harrods where you could barely see anything, and Covent Garden Market, the theatre, tea served in matinee intervals in your seat as you were seated in the theatre itself, the national anthem played after performances, a very British capital looking outward with fashion, music and design. The sweltering summer of 1976, I moved to the capital, and so did a significant number from the Middle East. It was London's real year of change. They bought property, made investments, and Harrods, the first retailer to target Middle Eastern customers, thus changing the store entirely and helping to change the entire area. Still, social cohesion existed. We knew our neighbours, who were, in the main, owner-occupiers. I went to drama college, entering the profession in 1980. Although the mindset was pretty left-wing, the profession still functioned. I mean, the public wouldn't know this, but Equity, the Actors Union, had some pretty spectacular encounters between left and right. You were well out of that, you're very lucky. And it still functioned, and there were tremendous landmark performances in theatre, TV, drama series that kept the nation hooked, the Forsyte Saga, the Pallisers, I, Claudius. Now, season 2 of Wolf Hall will see a black Jane Seymour. Go figure. By the mid-90s, I left the profession and went into further education, gaining a diploma and 2 degrees, all before woke ideology that has done such untold damage to the education system. There is some hope, though historian Robert Toombs is part of a team of academics forming a history curriculum for schools. I think that's something to be really celebrated. Fast forward to today. Commercial gentrification has seen many established Londoners move out. Neighbours are strangers. We have Airbnb gutting cities, not just London, Bath, Edinburgh, and you just don't know anybody. The cities are shabbier, most certainly London is, and in many ways I just feel alien. It just feels very odd. My area of knowledge is art history, which is just infected. Galleries are infested with a generation of woke curators, and I have to say, shame on Take Britain for its character and artistic legacy assassination of Rex Whistler in the current video installation now playing in the disused Whistler Mural restaurant. I work near Earl's Court, once known as Kangaroo Valley, because of a high Australian population. They're long gone. It's always been an edgy place, and the area has deteriorated, I have to say, with Class A drug taking a common sight, high crime, and many residents are wary to go to ATM or to even post a letter for fear of being attacked. Likewise, in my area, general antisocial behaviour is rising, crime, drug dealing is also present. I live in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. The police, I have glad to say, found my neighbour's intruder, so they took it seriously. He was an individual with mental health problems. They've got another challenge there who had, in fact, acted this way before and just indiscriminately targeted them. Now what do we have? We have endless febrile protests. This is very un-British. We never had this. And amongst the parade of flags, Palestinian, Queers for Palestine, LGBTQI alphabet soup, is the red flag of communism latching on. So I have to say, ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake, we are in the fight for our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila, so much. Our next speaker, we have 4 from Locals. Our next speaker is from Leeds, and it is Dean Sinnock. Dean, will you come? There he is. Come on down. Yeah. There you go.
So, good afternoon, and I would just like to say for everybody I've actually met here today and had a conversation with, it's been an absolute pleasure, so thank you very much. I came to the conference last year in Birmingham for my first time, and during the break there was a chance conversation, and during that chance conversation I was presented with the opportunity to start setting up a Leeds initiative through the Locals programme. And it was a good opportunity to start building grassroots communities again, which you'll hear a bit more about later. But it was a brilliant opportunity. So with that, I said yes. Last year, within the Leeds area, last October, we got a venue, we held an event, and we had a very good turnout. And people actually started to really enjoy and understand what the NCF's about, which is really core to this. That, you know, we're here to be a social movement, and hopefully we just start knitting society back together piece by piece. Now, the reason that I got involved with the NCF really was around the time in 2021. The death of George Floyd in America, followed by the BLM movement, followed by the toppling of statues, and then we started to see the 2-tier policing. So if you were protesting and you were BLM, well, the police will happily accommodate you whilst taking the knee. But if you were going out for a walk in the park during a lockdown, you might get arrested. So this is when my ears personally started to prick up, and actually I started to take more note of what was going on in the programme. Now, the reason why the death of George Floyd and BLM was so profound to me was because of what was happening at work. Now, in 2020, actually on this day, 4 years ago, I joined one of the big tech companies. And I was going to quickly find out what it was like to be a square peg assertively rammed into a round hole. And after the death of George Floyd, I was told to clear out my calendar, and I had to go and do an entire day on Black history, and really sort of enforced to do it. Now, let me make it really clear. I'm not against learning about Black history or studying any element of history. My problem with it is it's enforced, and it's basically very insincere, very disingenuous, and corporations are trying to build currency from using that for their own personal brands. So that's the reason this all started. Now, following that, you then start getting huge diversity, equity initiatives, identity politics. Everybody's got a neurodiverse condition. And what we're effectively doing is we're moving our corporations away from their core purpose. All right, we're diluting them down, and what we should be focusing on is basically, if you're a tech company, focus on tech, focus on building the best products. But we are now distracting people from that particular purpose. So what have we really got today? Well, we've got a workplace that's completely and utterly fixated on DE&I. It's actually become a pandemic itself, and it should be worrying for everybody involved. You know, it really should. The other problem we've got is this ideology. We are constantly coercing employees to participate in a more diverse and inclusive culture. And, you know, it's anyone's guess what that really means. The other problem is just D&I is just taken over. We should be thinking about skills, we should be thinking about knowledge, and we should be thinking about experience and adding value to what we're doing in the workplace and for customers. The other real big problem we see with this, there are very opportunistic individuals inside our corporations who think if they shout loudly about D&I, they're going to trans somewhere in the organization where they're going to have more influence, and unfortunately that's going to lead to feeble and inept leadership, okay? And that's going to be a real problem going forwards over the next couple of years. In summary, what I'd say is this. We as individuals need to continually take individual and personal responsibility. We need to go with authenticity in our endeavours, resisting the temptation to prioritise superficial gestures over meaningful progress. I would just like to say thanks for listening. Let's keep up the spirit, the collaboration and the advocacy that defines the NCF movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Fantastic. Great, thank you. Thank you. Great to hear from Dean. And finally, we have our organiser from Southampton, Roland Mackay. Oh, right there, coming down the aisle now. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this speech, or short speech, is kind of why I came to the NCF eventually. I've been following you for a long time, not in a bad way. The core of people's identity is their history. Undermine this and you can destroy them. I have become increasingly angry at how my history, our history, excuse me, I'm trying to read off a very small phone here, is being abused, traduced and appropriated to the purposes of a communist-minded elite who despise our history and want to replace it, and I think sometimes us feels that way. This behaviour mirrors almost exactly the methods of the communist regimes of the Soviet Union and its allies, where past events and information was, when required, deleted, adjusted or forgotten to serve the purposes of an evil regime which saw historical facts as a danger to its power and control. In our time, we have so-called academics who want to modify, convert, and rewrite our history. For example, I discovered recently, thanks to YouTube, there's a movement within the academic sphere of history which wants to do away with the term Anglo-Saxon. It seems because for many decades, the generally accepted history of that period of time was that those immigrants were not benign and that they actually waged, in the main, an existential war against the indigenous inhabitants of these islands, particularly in the east. They were far from friendly, and I'm not saying that immigrants are all unfriendly. There are many, many good immigrants, but we know there are some that aren't. This truth is, of course, sometimes uncomfortable for the woke communists because it challenges their constant narrative and inaccurate and warped theories of the always positive benefits of immigration. History has been co-opted as part of this elite's long march through their institutions, and they're arrogantly riding roughshod over our people's past. To add to this assault, we also have imported many people from thoroughly different societies and with very different histories, some of whom have begun to behave like conquering invaders, attacking and denigrating our people's history, traditions and cultures. They are aided by a significant number of people within our elites and the establishment, Mr. Blair being one. I'd like to re-quote and paraphrase part of a famous speech by Winston Churchill, because it seems to me apposite for the state we are currently in as a nation. I hope he will look kindly on us and that he will be approving of the NCF's intentions. The new battle for Britain is underway. Upon this battle depends the survival of our ancient Christian civilization. Upon it depends our own British way of life and the long continuity of our institutions, culture and traditions and the future existence of our people. A culture war is underway in my view. We who want to defend our way of life have come to this war somewhat late. To continue with the 1940 theme, I am a very passionate military history buff. I believe we are at our Dunkirk moment. We are reeling as a people and society from multiple assaults on our ancestors, our nation's honour, and to be slightly proud of our past achievements and glories. In this conflict, the enemy is not only outside, but also within our institutions and within our island fortress. The world owes this island a great debt of gratitude for the multitude of positive things we have done and created, which the modern world takes for granted. As somebody has said, we invented and created an awful lot of things. Millions of people around the world are alive today and living healthy and fulfilling lives because of our scientific, industrial and medical discoveries and our interventions, for example, in the expunging of slavery from a large part of the world. And yet all we hear is criticism. In my opinion, the time to fight has arrived. This country is becoming communist. There is a significant risk here. The NCF and its locals groups has opportunities to help counter this culture war across the nation. It's time to get started. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roland. I can't tell you how humbling it is, the amount of effort that our speakers, indeed all the other people involved, put into the development of our locals movement. It's wonderful. There is another man, though, who actually has masterminded the whole thing, and indeed his capacity for organisation and for work is, well, it's almost embarrassing because I can't match it. He's going to talk to us a lot more now about locals and indeed why we need it. Our national organiser, Stephen Balogh.
Good afternoon, everyone. Peter, you're too kind. About 6 weeks ago, at 2:30 in the morning, we were woken up in our little part of Ealing, West London, by what sounded like gunshots in the street outside our house. a deafening round of staccato fire. Reaching our window at the front, we cautiously peered out and saw that a large box of fireworks had been placed right in the middle of the street. By then, that first volley had just finished, and the large group of men and boys that had assembled, some of them obviously primary school age, were starting on a second box. By this time, I was dialing the police. As it turns out, were several other neighbours also. But this is not what shocked me. We've occasionally had hijinks of various sorts during our 25 years in the neighbourhood, from all sorts. What shocked me was noticing that a car with an open sunroof had started moving down the street slowly, kids jumping and dancing around it, with a third box of fireworks jutting out and angled up and forward in an unmistakable simulation of a mobile rocket launcher targeting our very houses. To their credit, the police responded quickly, proportionately and effectively, and there has been much less antisocial behaviour from that quarter since. But in our very same road, there is a family who, since the last time I spoke in this hall on the 7th of October, have been wary of leaving their house for fear of hostility. Both of these things in London and literally close to home. I'm an unashamed apologist for the essential trio of family, community, nation. Not just in an abstract sense, in fact, very much not in an abstract sense, but in expressing the real, practical, and urgent necessity in some real way of restoring them in our times. We all know that community, after all, form the warp and weft of our society. We also sense that this fabric is in danger of becoming threadbare and not even patchable. But what do I mean by community here today in the United Kingdom? Let me throw out a few sample definitions. A social group whose members reside in a specific locality, share government, and often have a common cultural and historical heritage, who share an identity-forming narrative, who have a shared socially significant characteristic such as place, set of norms, culture, religion, values, customs, or identity. These definitions might be good, they are good, but are ultimately insufficient because they also fit a sectarian, Hobbesian model of society made up of competing communities. This is where I believe connection with nation comes in. In the UK today, for me, the definition of a healthy community must be one that is working for the good of the whole body, not just a defined subset. One that brings about high trust between people who don't know each other very well, that reaches across class and background. Community, as we also already know, takes the constant keepy-uppy of sustained effort, individual and collective acts of will, commitment, competence, and generosity, all for the betterment of others. What does it look like in practice? Well, to adapt the late historian Kenneth Clark's comment about civilization, we know it when we see it. And we certainly know the opposite when we see it. A simulated rocket launcher attack at 2:30 a.m., for instance, or people fearing to leave their houses. And indeed, the other examples we've been hearing about in the course of this session and throughout the day. So under attack, we certainly are. The late great novelist Anthony Burgess, in his dystopian novel 1984, we've heard about 1985, I should say, 1984 we've heard about already, that was written in the late 1970s, describes a general social demoralization, a fatalism born from lack of care, a scant regard for the value and dignity of people as individuals and as members of the communities that they are part of. And Burgess, in his book, deliberately contrasts this with the growing presence of an organized and highly disciplined manifestation of Islam. This hopeless, broken society so described seems once more to be taking hold in our country. On this, I think we can all agree. You only have to look around at the decaying, edgy, alienating, sometimes feral feel of much of our urban landscape, and even sometimes well beyond. But why is it the case? Like others who've spoken today, I believe it is the outcome of disempowerment, of loss of agency, loss of a rooted sense of community and nation. But I also see this trend being brought about deliberately, not simply through passive neglect, perhaps even amounting to conscious replacement of the entire cultural structure. Out goes the encouragement and championing of voluntary assent, of associative activity based on a shared understanding. In comes control and coercion against them. All against a drumbeat of wounding denigration that is a prelude to total demolition. Such a tactic is, of course, a long-time trick used by occupying forces in wartime to subdue the population, but I see it being used in equal measure here and now. So what can we do about it? We as individuals and we as NCF. I'm going to propose 3 things. Firstly, cultivate and practice open-minded curiosity. Seek out different points of view and sources of information. Secondly, exercise healthy skepticism over everything you hear and read. Cross-reference and validate wherever you can. These, of course, take an investment in time, effort, and will, but a very necessary one. So what is the third thing I propose? Actively build community where you live and where you work. And this is where NCF Locals comes in. Exactly a year ago at our Birmingham NCF conference that many of you I know attended, we talked about our NCF Locals pilots in which we were looking to establish groups in various places, often with a launch event. In fact, that very conference gave rise to our now thriving Birmingham group. By the end of the year, we'd reached a total of 9 and decided to go nationwide during 2024. By the end of next month, after the current set of launch events around the country, we will be nearly 30 such groups, halfway to our target of 60, goodness, by the end of this year. And I hope there's going to be a map that comes up to show where we have got to, if I just pause for a second. There we are. So by the end of May, we should have established groups in every one of those centres. If you can't see it very well, we have reproductions of the map at our locals table. One thing I want to make, one point I want to make is that we're not confining it to England. We will be in Edinburgh as of early May, and we fully intend to go to Wales, and indeed, why not to Northern Ireland too? We have a number of NCF Locals on our books from Northern Ireland. So many of you here are already part of NCF Locals. You might be a member of one of these groups, or you might be in one of the regions. Thank you for being part of it. For those not yet part of it, how does it work and what can you expect? So firstly and fundamentally, it provides concrete reassurance that you are not alone within your locality in still thinking 2 + 2 = 4, that the definition of a woman is an adult human female. This alone can give a critical psychological boost. Secondly, and building on this, it provides the opportunity to associate together with others in your group. That might mean occasional meetups, sometimes involving a structured discussion or outside speaker, at other times purely social. All are good. Thirdly, once the group is established and continuing to attract new participants, it can decide how to act to influence politics in its own area, calling local parliamentary candidates, like me, to account on matters of culture, for instance. This aspect will certainly develop further as the general election comes up, and perhaps especially beyond it in the aftermath. For those living in an area not yet with an NCF Locals group, in fact for everyone, we also have our online private community platform within which you are able to interact with others in your own region and also able to participate in common online discussion forums. Many of you, I'm sure, will have discovered those and the rough and tumble of such discussions. As well as regional groups, we have experimental affinity groups for those involved in universities and for students and under 30s, and we'll be happy to add more such groups over time if these work out. And our future plans include the establishment of an online series of talks and discussions from the many experts we have in our number, and perhaps outside speakers also, plus plenty more besides. So what do we ask of you in return to be part of it? Well, we need you to have registered so that we can be sure everyone is in agreement to a common set of community guidelines, which amount to a commitment to respectful interaction and discretion at all times. We're deliberately keeping it low cost so that we don't have to charge for participation, and you don't actually have to be an existing NCF member because we want to maximise our reach. That said, as Peter has also already mentioned, we do encourage everyone also to consider becoming an NCF member, because that helps provide the funds, not just for NCF Locals, but for the other activities of NCF, its channels and so on. So one more thing, we ask for your time and participation in whatever way you're able to give, whether it's coming along to events and meetups, being active in our online community forums, or just being content to receive a periodic email update. This is because there's a fourth essential part to it, which is the development of NCF as a truly influential national movement. But this doesn't mean everyone has to put their heads above the parapet. Being an NCF Locals participant is discreet and unshowy. Our online community is private, we don't publish who is part of it, and our events are arranged and broadcast in a way, so broadcast as in the notices of them happening, in a way designed to minimize unwelcome attention. So NCF is a very practical way of building community, a new and I would argue unique form of political and social organisation across the country. It is one way you and I can help restore a sense of nation committed to every citizen, not to sectarian interests. Last thing before I close, NCF Locals would be nothing without its rapidly growing number of volunteer organisers, some of whom, Chris, Sheila, Dean and Roland, but there are at least a dozen more of the organisers here today, so those four you've heard speak. Together with deputies and others in support, we now have over 200 and are growing in number all the time of organisers and volunteers. And on NCF's behalf, I thank them all now. So get on board today, talk to any of us afterwards, and let's grow this NCF Locals movement together. Thank you very much.
Hello, if you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.